Buddy, hope you're doing well. Listen, I'm making this video kind of on the fly because I read this article. I was going to try to, do a B-roll or something on it, but it's just this article in the Washington Post by a guy named Chris Richards. The Beatles are overrated. That's our fault, not theirs. And it's by a guy named Chris Richards, and it says the Beatles are overrated. And it's really, of course, a just little discussion, kind of a commentary. I don't know if it's actually a review. I guess kind of a review slash commentary on the new documentary, "The Beatles Get Back," which I want to see. But the idea that the Beatles are overrated made me want to have a few comments about that, because it seems like so many classic things are being overrated, if not flat out toppled. Sometimes I think there's a certain element of okay boomer with all that. I don't know that much about Chris Richards, and it's kind of an interesting piece. But the headline says the Beatles are overrated, and he does say that in the piece. I think he might mean it in a thoughtful way, and I thought about it a little bit because there have been so many different overrated videos, overrated lists. And of course, I've watched a bunch of videos on overrated guitar players, and you watch these. Here are the 10 most overrated guitar players, according to my viewers, and it's like pretty much every great guitar player is overrated. I mean, if Clapton, Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, David Gilmour, they're all overrated. Who's left? I mean, pretty much everybody's overrated. And I guess now at least some people are saying the Beatles are overrated, and I'm sure we'll get around to the Stones are overrated. It's probably already out there somewhere. And what isn't overrated? I guess that was one thought I had. What Everything's overrated. Is classical music overrated? Probably. Especially with several of these discussions of that Get Backs noted that it was sort of for serious Beatles fans, and casual fans might find a little boring, or they won't understand a lot of the people that come in and out and all the footage and the inside jokes and everything. And I think the whole concept of being overrated is kind of for casual fans. They're these iconic figures they might not really know much about, and they just hear a little bit and say, "Oh, they're overrated." And I sort of don't think that concept is that helpful if you really take the music more seriously. But I do think almost everything's overrated because these figures become mythic figures, and we all have feet of clay. I think the good book, has the famous story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream that Daniel interpreted in The Great Golden Idol with feet of clay. Everybody has feet of clay. You can't name anybody, no matter how great they were, that wasn't overrated in some way. I always think of classical music. One of my favorite entertainers is actually Liberace. I want to do a video of him, and I grew up hearing a lot of Liberace. And he always used to joke that he played classical music with the boring parts left out. So he had a lot of classical training when he was a kid, and I'm sure probably could have been a pretty well respected concert pianist. And he went to entertainment. But one of the things he would do is he said he would take out all the boring parts. Well, there's probably a lot of boring parts in the greatest classical music, and we sort of focus on the great passages that sort of resonate, and the all of the boring parts that maybe in some 20-minute sonata or something, he would cut them out, and just say, well, people don't want to hear that. And in a way, it made him a more popular pianist. Charles Dickens used to write by the word, and if you read some of those great stories, I was thinking The Christmas Carol this time of year. You read some of it; it's wordy and everything. But you could say Charles Dickens is overrated, or a lot of writers, the big novels and that are these novels are so famous, but actually most people don't read them. How many people have ever really read War and Peace? If they sat down on page one, started reading it, the next thing they'd probably be telling us Tolstoy's overrated. And people, everything's overrated. There's always a man behind the curtain, but the on all these things, you step back and you look at the over arc of these human beings that have left such great work, And then you realize, no, they're not overrated. They're not overrated. I mean, the Beatles are overrated like, Rodgers and Hammerstein are overrated. You think they're overrated? If you just kind of walked into a musical and said, well, who's this Rodgers and Hammerstein? Roger Hammerstein, who is he? And you just sat down and started watching all their musicals. You might say, oh, they're overrated. Everybody was always talking about Rodgers and Hammerstein. I don't think they're that good or something. It's and you might be reacting to things that are dated, or maybe you just don't know that much about good songwriting, because Rodgers and Hammerstein are some pretty damn good songwriters. And that's sort of what I think about the Beatles. 1962 to 1970, they left such a catalog, but they're not overrated any more than other great figures are overrated, and they are great figures. They're some of the most important cultural figures of the last 200 years, no doubt. And like anybody you could name, you can't name one single person that was important and great that someone couldn't say they were overrated. And this new documentary is kind of interesting. I think I want to watch it. But one of the things, it's from a period, at that late 60s period, where the Beatles were fighting a lot, or legend has it, Yoko Ono's in like a lot of it, I guess, just sitting, the proverbial sitting on John's amp, or whatever, just kind of sitting there, and once in a while, and and there's, but the other thing I think a lot of people don't understand, that's the great period of classic rock, but it was a period that was not commercial, and it was a period where you just saw the artists I remember going, that period in general, things were very open, and it was not commercial. There wasn't this sense of everything being so commercial and glossy. And a lot of the concerts from that period were really rough, but they were just great. You listen to Woodstock, you see all kinds of crazy things, and you maybe hear some guitars out of tune or feedback and things like that, but that's part of the charm. Woodstock's not overrated. It was of that time, and the humanity of it, is what makes it great. And you could say, well, it rained, and some of the bands weren't as good, and you're just watching some movie that picked the best couple hours of a 3-day show, and so Woodstock's overrated. And if you say that, you're kind of missing the point. You might be making a kind of interesting point in some ways, and if you were a little more thoughtful, but if you just kind of dismiss it as being overrated. And I don't know if this Chris Richards was. He may well not have been, because actually I thought he had some good things to say about the documentary and the Beatles. But this weird thing is going on where everything's overrated. And like I said, when I saw the Beatles were overrated, it just reminded me of all these lists of guitar players that are overrated. They'll say the 10 most overrated guitar players, and they basically list the 10 most well-loved, popular guitar players in the world. But I mean, who's left to be overrated? Who's not overrated? If all these people are overrated, who's not overrated? Name some people who aren't overrated. I'll wait. Name some people. If you think Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, Keith Richards, you think they're all overrated? Maybe you can come up with some names that aren't overrated for us. I think that'd be great to hear. Well, who do you think's not overrated? I bet you're going to pick someone who's not rated at all. Probably someone most people haven't ever heard of, which is kind of what we're talking about. You're talking about famous people and an image that has kind of burned itself into the culture far beyond just the music. So anybody that you name that you don't think is overrated is probably going to be someone that's not really rated, someone that most people haven't ever heard of. So they're not really in the same category. When they say people are overrated, they're picking on the giants of culture, and you could do that with anything. I get what people are saying. You can say Babe Ruth was overrated. He struck out all the time. I mean, that's just part of the charm of it. But I don't know if the Beatles are overrated, if Eric Clapton's overrated, if Jimi Hendrix is overrated, if if the Stones are overrated. If you think Rodgers and Hammerstein is overrated, Charles Dickens is overrated. I don't know. You probably think George Washington is overrated. Napoleon is overrated. Jesus Christ, Gandhi, Socrates, they're all overrated. You tell me who's not overrated then, and I'll just wait. We'll put it in the we'll put it in the comments. Who's not overrated? If you're the great critiquer of who's overrated, seriously, tell me who's not overrated. That's great. I'll wait, because whatever standard greatness applies to, the Beatles were great. Obviously, and I think we all know that. I'm sure that Chris Richards thinks that. I think he's talking about us and the way we have sort of turned the Beatles into something maybe that that they didn't start out to be or something. But the music itself is not overrated. If the Beatles are overrated, who's not overrated? You just put some names in the comments of people you think aren't overrated, and I bet most of the names you come up with are people no one's ever heard of, which means they're not rated at all. If you're overrated, that means other people have rated you great. Uh, so if you come up with a bunch of names no one's ever heard of, that means that they're not rated. They're not in the same category of artist. You can do the same thing for anybody, athletes or anything. Everybody's got their sacred cows. Things I might be able to say things I think are overrated that others out there would take offense at, and I'm not going to do that. But Beatles great, just great. They need to let those songs go though into the culture like 19th century music, so people can just sing it. Because I do think the fact that it's a commercial product and a consumer item, we ended up treating it like consumers instead of participants in great music. And that music is 60 years old now, and it needs to enter the culture. So I think as long as it's sort of a corporate product, that will make it feel increasingly overrated in some ways, I think. Think about it. God bless you. Beatles are not overrated. If the Beatles are overrated, there's nobody left that's not overrated. If the Beatles are overrated, you can't name anyone that that's not overrated. Everybody's, and you know what? That's sort of true. Everybody's overrated. Everybody's overrated. We all have feet of clay. But greatness is when you look at the overarching span of a legacy. You don't look in the weeds of everything people ever played or did or whatever. You look at the overarching span and you see the greatness of a contribution to our world. And there are very few people that have ever made more of a contribution to the world than the Beatles. Thank you. God bless you.